On today's show, GM Brian Maclellan met with the press after the season was over, and he spoke about the future of TJ Oshie and Alex Ovechkin and what we can expect from this team in the fall. I'll give you my thoughts on GM Brian McClellan's meeting with the press next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holman. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go, the fast-paced game that lets you team up with your friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about GM Brian Maclellan's plans for the future. Does he plan on making any key additions this offseason to help bolster the goal scoring? We'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll talk about TJ Oshie. And did he play his last season with the Capitals this last season, or is there a chance we see him again in the fall? And then to close out the show, we will talk about his reactions to the playoffs, that despite the fact that the Capitals got eliminated in 4 games, there were some bright spots to this Capitals roster. But just to get it going here, talking about plans for the future for the Capitals was a big topic for Brian Maclellan as he met with the press and the different questions. And one of the biggest things they talked about off the top was we talked about Charlie Lindgren and what he meant to this team. And we know that during the trade deadline, there was a lot of chatter about the fact, will Charlie Lindgren come back to this team? Will he get traded? Will he get traded in the offseason? Mac hasn't started talking to Lindgren's agent yet. We like his game and what he did in the postseason. We'd really like to have him back on this team. And of course, as Capitals fans, we would love to have Charlie Lindgren back. There have been some speculations about Darcy Kuemper and could he get traded in the offseason. As of right now, all we know for sure is that Mac has not yet started talking to Lindgren's agent. But there was other players mentioned as well about the future of Mallenstein and McMichael, and only initial talks have taken place as far as Mallenstein and McMichael's representation. Of course, McMichael was the guy that stepped up huge in Nick Backstrom's absence. And Mallenstein is the guy that has the physical flair, laying his body out, doing whatever it takes to stop pucks on the fourth line was huge. Other players up in flux as well as Max Pacioretty and Nicolas Aube-Kubel. Now, if you're going to ask me, I would be most surprised if Max Pacioretty comes back. Nicolas Aube-Kubel would be another player that I think is expendable. Aube-Kubel has shown glimpses of greatness for the Capitals in his tenure here. And Max Pacioretty, and I'll talk about him in upcoming breakdown videos, never really found his game. He is a guy that prides himself in his shot. And it was kind of a one-off as far as he was concerned about not helping a team contribute offensively. So for me, I would be most surprised if Max makes his way back. But what Spencer Carberry said is he said, we'll wait and talk about lineups with the coaching staff and make a decision after that. One of the things that Spencer Carberry had mentioned is that he wants more goal scoring, of course, and he would like to see the back end bolstered a little bit as well. Those are all decisions that will need to be taken next. So where do the Capitals get offense next season? That is a key question, as that was kind of non-existent in the playoffs and it didn't really show up during the regular season either. And Brian Maclellan said, well, I hope we get some internally. And he's also expecting to see more from Hendricks Lapierre. And he was impressed with McMichael's game. I do think that if that is where he's hoping to get the primary offense for this team is with those young players, maybe in part. And he was reluctant to talk about if he plans on making any key additions. What he did say is that I would like to. It depends on who's available. I did not walk away from that press conference feeling super confident that he is going to seize the day and go out and get that top six forward that we've talked about. But, one of the things I know about Mac is oftentimes he doesn't talk about stuff. It just happens. Talking about the projection and where we need to get more from, there was a light moment in the press conference. He says, Ovi, of course, will get 42 goals. That's where we have him penciled in for is 42. Of course, a bit of a light moment there. And one of the things that was spoke of is that we can't put all of the weight on Alex Ovechkin to get all of the goal scoring. I've been hard on him about how he didn't show up in the postseason, but it isn't really fair that he has the expectations that, he's the only one that can score goals. If you take a look at the Rangers, it's not just one player, it's scoring up and down the lineup. So we'll need to see more from not just Alex Ovechkin, but other players as well. He said that we'll look outside the organization too, though. He's not just going to look internally. He's open to trades and free agents, and also spoke of the fact that the salary cap is going to be increasing and that there is some draft capital that the Capitals have accumulated. Not to mention, like I mentioned, salary cap flexibility as well. So I do think that Brian Maclellan will do what he can do to go out and make that key thing. But, kind of what gives me some reservations and how I'm not putting all my hopes in that is that he said he was going to do this last season, and he just said that there was no one available. I think that Brian Maclellan is going to have to kind of look outside the box and, be willing to explore big trades. I know that we love Lapierre and McMichael and Protas, but to go into next season thinking that those guys are going to be the ones driving the train for the offense, I don't really see it. And of course, they were talking about the future of Nick Backstrom. He just said, we'll see. He wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't play out the remainder of his career on the LTIR. So I wouldn't expect to see Nick Backstrom playing for the Capitals next season or ever, really. I think that, they have just not come out and said it formally. But if he plans on spending the rest of his time under contract with the Capitals, it will be on the LTIR. One of the things that Spencer Carberry had mentioned is that he wants to see more speed. That was brought up with Mac as well. He says, I think the young guys have speed. That happens when you transition from an old team to a young team. The playoffs were good for the young guys, and they know how to get bigger. They know how to get bigger. They're going to have to get faster. And so it's not just about speed, but it's about getting bigger and faster. But speed is something that's going to happen when you transition, like Mac said, from one of the oldest teams roster-wise in the NHL to one of the younger ones. But I still don't think, even with this young talent, as there was quite a bit of young talent on the ice, that the Capitals were able to keep up with the likes of the New York Rangers, which were pretty much skating circles around the Capitals. So I like where his heart's at, but ultimately I think they're going to have to look outside the organization. Talking about Kuemper as well, is that, it's been my feeling that Kuemper is a good goalie, that he had one bad season. And Brian Maclellan went on to say that the season got kind of away from him, that he had a rough patch and the Capitals were in win now mode because this team was struggling and they saw stability with Charlie Lindgren. So there weren't a whole lot of opportunities for Darcy Kuemper to show if his game, in fact, had improved. And I'll talk about in a future breakdown video with Darcy Kuemper that he said that he felt like his game had improved, that he had worked with the coaches, but never really got a chance to show his improvement. It was a tough position for Darcy to be in, but he's been consistent for a long time, Max said. And that was difficult as the Capitals struggled. So they went with the sure thing, and the sure thing was Charlie Lindgren, because we know he was lights out for the Capitals. But Mac does think that he will return and that he will return strong. And then talking about the pressures of Alex Ovechkin, Ovi is 38. We can't expect him to do everything for the Capitals forever. It's just not realistic. Expect to see highs and lows in his career. The schedule and his age take a toll on him, as the Capitals played quite a few back-to-backs that it took that toll on Alex Ovechkin, and it's not going to get any easier for him next season. There's a lot of pressure on him. That's not fair to consider where he's at in his career. So some difficult things for the Capitals to consider, and defense as well. We talk oftentimes about the improvements that need to take place on the Capitals offense, but John Carlson playing 20 to 30 minutes a night is not a recipe for success for John Carlson, for his long-term longevity on this team, that certain things will need to be taken care of. Brian Maclellan said the Capitals need to do a better job managing his workload, that, he stepped up out of necessity, but it's not an ideal situation to have him play those heavy minutes. But don't expect there to be any buyout. So if you think that the Capitals are going to buy this player out or that player out, it's just not going to be in the cards for Brian Maclellan or the Capitals. All right, so coming up here straight ahead, we will talk about a player that's been spoke of quite often here lately, and that is TJ Oshie. A true lightning rod for this team, a motivator on the ice, off the ice. What does GM Brian Maclellan think the future of TJ Oshie is on the Capitals? I'll discuss coming up. It's winner take all in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home big wins of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, or more. And guys, let me tell you something. Maybe you're watching the NHL playoffs. Maybe you're watching baseball and you're not that into it. Open up the FanDuel app and put a little bit of money on the game. All of a sudden, the game is that much more exciting. So visit FanDuel.com/locked on and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So TJ Oshie, as long as I've covered the Capitals or followed sports, I rarely see players talk so highly about a player or coaches or GMs that it's a widespread love fest for TJ Oshie. And I get it. I love his game. I like what he brings on the ice. He has a tremendous hockey IQ that even if he's not scoring goals, he makes the players around him better. And it's a difficult question for the Capitals and GM Brian Maclellan and ultimately TJ Oshie about what his future is. One of the things that TJ Oshie said is that he wants some sort of guarantee that his back will be good, that he's not going to have to keep flying in his specialist from Minnesota to realign him, that when he's in the grips of pain, he's actually laying on the floor having to pee in a bottle. That's not an ideal situation. That's not healthy. And for me, I don't want to see TJ Oshie in that situation. If it gets to that point, we have to start looking at the bigger picture other than hockey and about if we really care about this guy, other than just what he does with the Capitals jersey on, let him walk away if he's not up for it. We cannot be selfish. He does have a wife and kids, and he has a life to think about outside of hockey. But he is a dynamic player and a player that a lot of Capitals fans have grown to love, of course. And TJ Oshie was the topic of conversation with Brian Maclellan as he met with the press. TJ Oshie left things up in the air. What have you heard was the question to Mac. Respect for what he did here. Impressive what he's done for himself and the organization. I don't know how long he'll want to keep putting his body through that. We'll take some time and see where he's at and if there's any solutions for his game to come back. Of course, we would love to see TJ Oshie come back in the fall if he can get that resolution. We know that he had that double ablation done on his back, which was essentially just a Band-Aid. It was not a fix. It was putting fix-a-flat in a tire that needed to be repaired. He needs a long-term solution, and I think that is what Capitals fans should expect. Kind of like with Nick Backstrom, we would love to see him back, but we want to see the best players on the ice. They then went to ask him, is the club trying to help him internally, or is he doing it on his own? He says, we've gone down the road with a few specialists. He has his own guys. Listen, they have thrown the kitchen sink at the TJ Oshie situation. TJ Oshie himself has as well. And it's kind of a wait and see. Wait and see what TJ Oshie said. They asked him, is there a deadline when you want to know if Oshie will proceed with next season? I know it's early, but when you look at the Backstrom situation, it kind of put the Capitals in a bad spot. And it's impatient. We all want to know what the future is. Is TJ Oshie going to be good to go? I don't know what they're thinking. Are they going to give him a hard date of July 1st that, let us know what's going to happen or hit the bricks? Not the case. We know that this is a fluid situation, and they're not going to put a hard deadline on him. Mac went to say, I'm not going to put a date on when he has to let me know. I'll support him on whatever he wants to do. Seek solution. If he wants to come back, that's fine. And if he can't, we'll deal with that as well. GM Brian Maclellan and the Capitals already dealt with that with Nick Backstrom. It's all a part of the perils of, running an older hockey team roster-wise, that there are a lot of players. And at some point, if they don't make the decision before they get injured, that sometimes the injuries will dictate their future. Sometimes players, they know that they've seen a lack of production and they'll just walk away. And then there's certain players that are ultimate competitors, and they're not going to leave the ice until injury dictates it. It does seem that is the case with Oshie, and we saw with Backstrom as well. We're all pulling for Oshie, of course, but he did go on to say, and we all know that he's a driver for our team, big on the ice. He brings energy. He brings compete. He's a key piece in what we've accomplished here. Let's not forget the Stanley Cup in 2018. And just everything that he's done. You talk to Tom Wilson. You hear him talk. Dylan Strome. Just all the kind of players. Connor McMichael. They speak on how key he's been in the development of players. What kind of great teammate he is. That his optimism is infectious. That just remove hockey from the situation. He just seems like a great guy. Period. But you add what he does on the ice, and he will go down as one of the best Capitals to ever put on a sweater. That I know for sure. All right, so coming up here straight ahead, we'll talk about the Capitals got eliminated in 4 games, and there wasn't a whole lot of positivity for me to glean from that situation. But Brian Maclellan did see some positives. He found some lemonade with those lemons. Let's talk about that coming up. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that. But there is just so much good stuff going on in the game here. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much more to get. Unique stickers you can trade with your friends to complete albums for a big prize. Cool new playing pieces to travel the board with. Hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or robot machine. And there's also new timed events for help you win big prizes like massive multipliers for every win. Or you can win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So talking about the playoffs is something that I would really kind of like to forget. I know that it was seen as a victory that the Capitals made it to the playoffs period, But kind of like Spencer Carberry said, if that is enough for you, that is a loser's mentality. There is a whole lot more that I wanted from the Capitals. I had feared that they would get eliminated in the first round. And as it turns out, the Rangers were just too much for the Capitals, but there was some positivity. And GM Brian Maclellan weighed in on that as well. He said it's mixed. It's difficult to be eliminated in 4 games. It was good to see the young guys step up, playing well in high pressure situations. And I've talked about that on the show, that no doubt those guys, those players, McMichael, Protas, those kind of players, Lapierre, their game improved a lot based on the fact that they helped the Bears win the Calder Cup last season, that they were put to the fire and they found a way to overcome adversity. A lot of those players went into the Calder Cup as boys and left as men. And I also think they ratcheted up their game just by being in the playoffs with the Capitals against the Rangers, despite the fact that they got worked over. And talking about this team exceeding expectations, is it possible that we have squeezed the most out of this lineup that was made evident in the playoffs? He says, yes, we started this season with a much different lineup. We started with Kuzi, Backey, Stroman, McMichael. It ended quite differently. So the question is based on that, would the Capitals have fared better, say, McMichael, he played a full season. Kuzi was still on the Capitals. Nicholas Backstrom was still here, and Strome was clutch. That's how the team was laid out before the puck was dropped for the first time last season. Potentially, yes. I think that, if we take a look back on Backstrom and how clutch he has been for this team for years, the great playmaking, I think the Capitals would have been better. You take a look at how Kuzi has played with the Hurricanes in the playoffs, that yes, I think on paper, the Capitals may have done better in the playoffs. So, this can't go squarely on GM Brian Maclellan, as he's like, I sketched out a good plan, but it changed. And the Capitals had to plug and play different players, guys from Hershey, and put them through their paces. This also put a lot of experience, and it put a lot of, pressure on Spencer Carberry. He gained a lot of experience, shall I say, from the whole experience. A lot of sleepless nights. He said it felt like this team was in the playoffs for the last 2 to 3 months. That I think that the team, I think the coaches, I think the players that remain next fall, they'll be the better for it. I hope there are some key additions. But like he said, we ended up in a different spot. It evolved into something we couldn't have anticipated. I think there was a hunch that, Backstrom was going to step away from hockey. I don't think Kuzi was in the cards. I know that it's been a bumpy ride for him on this team, but I don't think anyone saw him entering into the NHL's player assistance program and then subsequently get sent out to the Hurricanes. And then just the increased roles of McMichael, Lapierre, Malenstein, Protas, that, we've talked about for the longest time. We want to see this team get younger, but they got younger in a hurry. And I think sometimes that inexperience kind of came into focus. But in the end, it presented an opportunity to get a look at some of the young guys that may not have had a look on the team had those other players not been injured. So the good and the bad. The Capitals made it to the playoffs is a moral victory. They got eliminated in 4 games. That's the bad news. But we did. We got a chance to see Connor McMichael play a bigger role. I think that Nick Backstrom saw his numbers diminish, and I think he knew that he was kind of holding up the progress of Connor McMichael. So he did the noble thing and stepped away from hockey. And, TJ Oshie talked about it as well. It was difficult that, he would be in the lineup. He'd be out of the lineup. There was guys getting called up and sent down from Hershey on the regular. That, sometimes the best laid plans go to waste. And I think that, this team was sketched out to be better than they were. I don't think that anyone had thought that they were Stanley Cup bound based on that lineup. And I don't necessarily think they will be next season. My hope is that they make it to the playoffs. My hope is that Brian Maclellan does something big, huge. Like I've talked about before, if I'm going to rate what he's done with his team so far, it could show improvement. And I don't know, maybe there's pressure being put on him by Ted Leonsis, to kind of keep the purse strings tight and that he doesn't want to spend a lot of money. But I take a look around the league and the big moves that were made on certain teams, the Vegas Golden Knights, that's the one that really pops for me. What they did during the trade deadline that I I long for a GM that will make decisions like that, sometimes they ask the fans, well, what do you want me to do? This guy, that guy. Listen, I'm not a GM of the team. I'm a podcast host. I think that they should move some players. I think that they're not going to be easy decisions to make. I think that potentially they should have moved some of these injured players, these old injured players, before their value has been so greatly diminished. But that's the position that we're in. You take a look at Backstrom, you'll get 0 for him. TJ Oshie, if they wanted to trade him, that's the hard part, is holding on to this lineup for too long. I think that GM Brian Maclellan wanted to squeeze the most he possibly could out of this lineup because it was the one that got him the cup in 2018. But 2018 wasn't yesterday. It's 2024, and it's time to move on. It's unfortunate that they moved on based out of necessity. But the question is, in the fan base, would they have been okay moving TJ Oshie when he was at his most healthy, or Nick Backstrom? I think a lot of fans would have been what is this GM doing? Is he drunk moving Nick Backstrom and TJ Oshie? As it turns out, it may have been the right thing to do. You could have maximized a return on Nick Backstrom. You could have maximized a return on TJ Oshie. Now you will get nothing. A lot of hindsight, living in the rearview mirror, 2020. I get all that. But it's tough questions for the Capitals because now they're kind of in the no man land of, we don't have a lot of great assets to move unless we want to move prospects or draft picks, which is kind of, draining the retention pond for the coming seasons. That they're in a tough position, that it might be a rough couple years until this team, the young players, either step up or get moved out. We're going to need to see a whole lot more from McMichael and Protas and Lapierre. If everything I've kind of learned from that meeting with Brian Maclellan in the press is, kind of what I've taken from it is, don't expect too much. I'm going to do what I can do, but don't expect anything crazy. If I was going to summarize and paint what he said with a broad brush, is like, I'll do what I can do, but, don't expect a whole lot from me. Those are not the things that, I'm going to go into next season going, yes, this team is going to make a push for the cup. Ultimately, the Capitals waited too long. They tried to squeeze too much juice out of this rock the red era, and now there's not a lot of rocking of red, and it's kind of entered into mediocre hockey, and mediocre hockey is not going to win you cups. I'm hoping that I'm wrong. I'm hoping that GM Brian Maclellan can pull a rabbit out of his hat. He can get creative and get this team competitive by the fall. That is my hope anyway. If that's actuality, that's something altogether different. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Washington Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are ultimately what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On's 24/7 streaming channel, available on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.